It's only Thursday, and I'm Eric Wemple, media critic for the Washington Post opinion section, not Molly Roberts, who normally sits here. With Molly on vacation and the Mueller news on fatigue mode, we're discussing racism as it relates to Hollywood and a certain U.S. territory. Joining me are Karen Attia, editor of the Washington Post's global opinion section and an all-around WAPO video stalwart, Dana Milbank, an op-ed columnist here at the Post, not to mention the author of a column in December 2015 that declared, "Let's not mince words. Donald Trump is a bigot and a racist." And Eugene Scott, from the news side here at the Post, who writes about identity politics for The Fix. Folks, you don't have to be a news hound to know that Roseanne Barr this week tweeted something horribly racist. Then she apologized, got fired, and launched millions of articles, segments, and blog posts. But you did need to be a bit more civically minded to learn the latest dramatic news about Puerto Rico, a U.S. territory with 3.3 million people. A new study published in the New England Journal of Medicine says the death toll for September's Hurricane Maria is 70 times higher than official counts. At least 4,645 people died, not 64. And that's a conservative figure, thanks to something known as survivor bias. After a flagging U.S. response to the hurricane, Kerry Gibson wrote on Vox.com, "It remains all too clear that after more than a century of U.S. rule, Puerto Rico remains, in the American public imagination, a foreign land. There are a number of reasons for this, but one is especially obvious. It is perceived as ethnically distinct from the mainland." It appears that she's making a link between racism, which we saw in Trump's election campaign, and the president's policy. Karen, does this represent an instance where we're seeing our worst fears materialize?
Yeah, I mean, I think even from the outset of Hurricane Maria, we saw, well, let's even begin with like before Hurricane Maria. First of all, half of Americans, according to polling, don't even realize that Puerto Rico is an American, like the citizens are Americans themselves, right? And I think I would agree with the Vox writer that Puerto Ricans are seen as ethnically distinct, as Hispanic, as not,
As other,
right? So we all remember back in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria where it took Trump a long time to even go and visit the island, and when he did, he threw paper towels into the crowd.
Beautiful soft paper towels,
right,
just for the record.
I'm sure he got into a fight with Carmen Cruz, the mayor of San Juan, and we just saw this like contempt and disdain for the suffering of.
and he
Hurricane
tweeted
Maria.
about it too.
Yeah, he tweeted about it, and even at the time he said that he almost said that they were just sitting around, right?
Right, well, he said that they wanted everything done for them, right?
Exactly, but Politico came out with a report saying, comparing Trump's response to Texas to Puerto Rico, and just a couple of tidbits from that. It says during the first days after Harvey, which hit Texas, FEMA provided 5.1 million meals and 4.5 million liters of water, but it delivered just 1.6 million meals to Puerto Rico and just 2.8 million liters of water to the island. 9 days after Harvey, we had 30,000 personnel in Houston, in Texas, compared with just 10,000 at the same point in Maria. So we saw documented that the response on a policy level was way lower than what we saw in Houston. And now we're seeing with the Harvard report that potentially 4.6 thousand people, Americans, could be dead, are dead.
And I think one thing that's also missing in the whole Hurricane Maria conversation is how little attention is being given to the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Oh, yeah.
And we've had their representative in Congress has talked about even the further otherizing ethnically because the majority of the U.S. Virgin Island citizens are black. And so they feel even more distinct from what is part of Americans' idea of what it means to be a citizen. And Trump, I believe, did not visit the U.S. Virgin Islands. I believe Pence did, but the U.S. Virgin Islands have just been missing from the headlines altogether.
Dana, do you think, I mean, you wrote early on this. This was, that December 2015 column, I linked to it several times. It was a big deal at the time. I don't think many people.
Right, now it seems sort of a common observation.
That's right. Do you see, is this one of the areas where you see a linkage between what's somewhat a president says and what happens in the bureaucracy, or no?
Well, I mean, whether you, I thought the question was whether this is a racism is at
Right.
play here. And I think in any one of these things, you could always say, well, it could be something else. The problem is when you line up all of these things, they can't all be coincidence and all be an accident and all be a misunderstanding. So I think long ago, at least a couple of years ago, people should have stopped giving Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt on these things. The really appalling thing about the new study, I mean, we saw intermediate studies showing the death count was much higher. The appalling thing is that it really is related to the response of the United States government, because what they were looking at with the original death tolls, a tree falls on you, flooding,
exactly.
that sort of thing. But these are people dying because they didn't get the medical care they needed. They didn't have the water. They didn't have the electricity. They couldn't get their roof fixed. So these were all, by definition, preventable death. These are in some way man-made deaths as opposed to Mother Nature causing it. So that's what's truly extraordinary. And then, of course, it looks grotesque to go back now and say, a real disaster like Katrina, when this is obviously of a greater magnitude.
But then it's kind of like this vicious cycle, right? Because when Trump ignores it, doesn't talk about it, the media follow along, we don't give it the coverage that it deserves. We aren't sitting here asking, demanding, Ricardo Rossello, the governor of Puerto Rico, that counted 64 deaths as the official toll.
Initially 15, right?
Initially 15. This is outrageous. How can we have a death count that's 70 times higher? So even with, as we're talking about sort of Trump's, individual attitudes towards people of color and seeing how that plays out in policy responses, it's also a question about the media. How have we dropped the ball, perhaps, in like pushing for adequate responses for these people who are dying?
Right. Well, I mean, as Dana sort of mentioned there have been some intermediate work on there. Francis Robles from the New York Times went down there with a crew, and they found that about 1,000 people had died. This was in December. They said, they did some really tough reporting. They really pounded on the Puerto Rican officials, and they did all kinds of stuff. They came to 1,052 in early December. But that didn't seem to talk about media sort of massing and, critical mass of media coverage never happened, did it?
You're right. And this actually gets into that sort of related topic of why do we all follow Donald Trump's tweets and why don't we go out there and do our... Of course, we do that kind of reporting. It doesn't seem to get critical mass. And I think that's because there's just such a din here in Washington. There's I mean, it's just, forget about it, it's only Thursday. It's only 1 p.m. and we've apparently started a new trade war. So it's there's only so much bandwidth, and it's not that these things aren't being reported, I think, but that there's no way for it to break through. I mean, obviously you can't put it at the top of page one on the homepage every day. So I don't disagree with you. I guess
it's the level of outrage. It's not to say that it's been ignored, and there's obviously been great reporting, but the level of outrage and demands for accountability. I mean, can you imagine if this happened in Texas. This happened in Texas.
Right.
This happened in Louisiana.
Or this happened when another 800 outrages hadn't also happened.
Right.
we were all
we
pulling
remember
our hair.
Katrina. I mean, that's a whole. We remember, the responses to Katrina and how, George W. Bush and how FEMA failed, and again, communities that were largely black, largely poor. So again, maybe the right thing to think about, what if this happened in New York City, right? Can you imagine how incredibly outraged we would be? It would be 24/7 news, right? But
that's for sure.
I want to talk a little bit about how Trump framed Puerto Rico and how it may relate to more contemporary things. He wrote in that tweet that the Puerto Ricans want everything to be done for them when it should be a community effort. Was he signaling to his appointees that, you can stand down on this Puerto Rico thing? And does that relate at all to how he's pulled MS-13, the violent gang, into the center of the immigration debate? Is that, or is that are those disparate?
I was going to say he certainly wasn't communicating to his top aides that this should be a priority. that we should put resources behind helping these Americans get through this very difficult time. And I think one of the reasons he did that is because one of the reasons Trump did win is because of his hardline immigration policies. And while he's made sweeping generalizations and conflations about Mexican immigrants and El Salvadorans and Puerto Ricans, many of those people who got on the Trump train in Texas, in Alabama and Louisiana and some of the other Gulf areas that were impacted by Harvey as well, wanted to know that the Trump they voted for was prioritizing them opposed to these people that they wrongly thought were internationals.
Right.
And so some of that, I think, definitely shaped the response.
I think I would say he could have been signaling that, but I find whenever you try to say, what is going on in the president's mind? What's the strategy? You're always going to come up empty.
Well, you wrote this week that
Why
he's
did you
just a
just
madman,
Right, you just have no idea whether he was big. At other times he said, well, we're going to have to, he basically said we're going to have to forgive their debt. He clearly didn't have any intention of doing that. So it's hard to know really what was behind that there. But if he is thinking purely in political terms, he may have shot himself in the foot here because a lot of people have now left Puerto Rico for Florida, and guess what?
Right.
They can vote because they're American
That's right,
citizens.
they can vote.
Yeah.
And it's, you're right, it is automatic, they're American citizens, it's a U.S. territory. It's a little complicated, I guess,
Yeah.
if you're not paying attention,
Yeah.
but
But I mean, regardless of what his intentions are not, what sort of five-dimensional chess he's playing with all this or not, the impact remains the same. The impact with the message that we're doing everything that we can for them, and almost implying, even when he went to Puerto Rico, almost implying that that they should be grateful. I mean, it just evokes this image of like almost like the welfare citizen sort of trope, almost like they're sitting on their behind, doing nothing. They're lazy, and it's again similar to how, you know, in the sort of racist stereotypical white imagination of people of color in this country as well. So like, again, no matter, you know, what his intentions are.
Right. It's
That's-
almost
that's
colonial in
yeah,
its approach. Like he's
absolutely.
the magnanimous viceroy who
Absolutely.
There's a
tosses them
larger-
paper towels.
There's a larger conversation about that, about which communities have their issues prioritized in government, and to your point, in media coverage. And part of that, I think, is reflective of who's actually in positions of power in government and in media in terms of what we focus on. I think if there were more people from Puerto Rico, from the U.S. Virgin Islands, just from islands, period, in positions of influence in the Trump administration, they could have brought their concerns to the table. I think there are more people on the Trump train at higher levels from Texas and who can resonate with Texas and in media as well. And so that's probably why coverage pivoted to other topics, in addition to the fact that December everyone was focused on Roy Moore as well. And
that was exactly when the New York Times dropped its big study on the death rate. It was December 8th. When was the election? Was it
like a day or two before that?
Yeah. So I mean, that was a heavy news cycle. Let's turn to Roseanne. Roseanne Tuesday, the whole episode had to mark a watershed in media straight talk. On CNN, there was Wolf Blitzer, there was Brian Stelter, there was Brooke Baldwin, all of them drawing the harshest of judgments about a tweet by Roseanne Barr. Take it from a far more experienced news host.
Breaking news, a sudden and stunning response to shockingly crude and racist tweets. ABC has abruptly canceled its huge hit show, Roseanne, after the star Roseanne Barr compared former Obama official Valerie Jarrett to an ape.
Other major outlets, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and various TV news organizations used the same plain language. Still, this is the U.S. media. There were others that defaulted to familiar weasel words. Racially charged was a formulation deployed by Newsweek, some entertainment trade publications, and The Hill, which also dubbed it racial in one headline, as if everything in American life isn't racial in one way or the other. Eugene, when you read mainstream media coverage of race, do you sometimes want to edit out the softer terms?
Absolutely. I think there's a frustration from Roseanne and people like her who feel like the word racist is used too regularly in our society. But it's used often because it's a problem and should be used often. And this would be an example of that. I think a lot of times people have ideas that they want to put out that they don't want to be called racist, but they want to keep the ideas. And they're less concerned about getting rid of racist ideas than they are about just being called racist. And I think if we helped communicate that this is actually racist, and not because of our own biases, but because of what the definition of racist actually is, I think we could actually respond to the real issue of racism in America. I had a piece today in the Fix that said more than 6 in 10 people feel like America's racial tensions have gotten worse. Racial tensions, like what does that mean? Like it suggests that there's like an even playing field. Like it's not
a pull, a push and
yeah,
a pull.
there are groups that are being more racist towards other groups than than the opposite.
Yeah. Or it could mean that certain groups are speaking back and protesting the treatment that perhaps, not that protesting in open ways when we see with the
But
NFL.
that's been called creating tension, right? By getting on your knee. Yeah.
Now, I was, as I was reading Eric's terrific piece calling out the weasel words on this, I realized with some chagrin that I have at times used the word racially charged. So I'm thinking about that there probably is a distinction where something is like a dog whistle. It's sort of vaguely, like where is the, like this is clearly across the line, but like when he says, oh, where's my African American? Now, is that racist? It's clearly racially charged. Like where, I don't know exactly where the line is, other than we know it crossed it this time.
I would like to point to one thing, and that was when he made the comments about Judge Gonzalo Curiel, who is a naturalized U.S. citizen, is a U.S. citizen of Mexican heritage, and he was presiding over the Trump University case. Trump said he had a conflict of interest because he wanted to build the wall. That was, Paul Ryan had some words to say about that.
Right,
and I
textbook definition, I think he said.
Right.
Yeah.
He did.
Yep. So I think we'd like to run Paul Ryan talking about that. I think it's important to note that.
Claiming a person can't do the job because of their race is sort of like the textbook definition of a racist comment. I think that should be absolutely disavowed. It's absolutely unacceptable.
So, but many news organizations called them racially charged, those comments by Trump. So you have Paul Ryan, who's farther out there than some news organizations. What do you make of that?
I mean, first of all, I would really like, as Wesley Lowery tweeted 2 days ago, I'd really like to see what a formal style book definition of racially charged
Right, it
means.
sounds like static electricity or something.
Right, like
Oh, I've racially charged this one.
right. So there's that, and I think there's this sense that in our society, calling somebody a racist seems to be the worst thing you could call somebody. Like that's one of the meanest words that you could call somebody, right? And it speaks to that's pejorative. That's name calling, and that speaks to someone who's like a mean person. But it just by counting or by clouding and obscuring what is racist, what isn't, by using again these weasel terms, it helps. It only serves to obscure what we're actually dealing with, obscure who we are as a nation, and that doesn't. It helps to perpetuate it, right?
As a threshold matter, though, it's not as extreme to call comments or remarks racist as it is to call someone's soul racist, right?
Sure, yeah,
So that's all we're
absolutely.
talking about with respect to Roseanne, and the same thing with the Curiel comments. Just to call them racist does not make
So then,
it
if
true.
that's the case, then why couldn't we do it? If it was
Right,
just a
exactly.
comment?
Because it was
If
a comment.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
that was the case, then why was it so hard, right? And again, I mean, there are plenty of people who say we're more afraid to call something or somebody racist than we are to call actual racism, particularly when it comes to systemic.
Well, it's you can objectively say a remark is racist. To know what a person is, you'd have to be in their head, and that's why when I use that phrase with Trump, I was like, well, you've lined up the following 75 things here. They can't be coincidence.
Right.
But
And you
now,
mentioned
if Roseanne didn't have, this is the first time anything like that had ever happened.
Actually, no.
Right. I was saying if that were the first time.
I was
Yeah.
like, wait a
Yeah.
second.
Well, what's
She has
interesting
a history.
about this history is that the American people do not feel the same apprehension that newsrooms seem to feel. The majority of Americans, based on polling, think that Donald Trump is racist. We've written about this at The Fix repeatedly. And so a lot of the pushback we're getting is from real people out in America saying, stop saying racially charged. I also think...
Stop with the
just say
pushy
racist.
language.
Get it out of there. I also think, and this is a separate conversation, I think one of the reasons newsrooms are really anxious and apprehensive about the language we use in identifying racism is because we have our own diversity issues in newsrooms. And so we don't have a history of addressing racism in these workspaces and in society as a whole. And so we can't deal with it outside of our offices when it's happening in the White House and on Capitol Hill.
Well, you know, we in the media often use facts to put labels on politicians sometimes. You know, if we say someone's in favor of tariffs and so on and so forth, they're protectionists. If we say someone is, you know, someone is in favor of cutting taxes, you know, it might be a supply side. But yet, when they do all the things that Dana documented in that December 2015 column, we're really, really hesitant to say racist.
Especially when they say, I'm the least racist person, repeatedly, that you'll ever meet.
Which I think is part of the problem, because I think that if you want to stay away from the racist thing, it helps to apologize when the racism is pushed right back in your face and say, you know, you're right, I screwed up, that was a bad comment. But as far as I know, that hasn't happened.
Not only has it not happened ever
With the president.
with the president, his initial response was to make the whole situation about him. He was asked to repeatedly respond to Roseanne Barr because, and people were like, she's just an actor. She's an actor that he valued enough to congratulate when her show was doing well. The top actor on show on ABC, he responded with saying, well, Disney, ABC, no one apologized to me. Like, that was his response.
He mentioned the Brian Ross. And,
Can I just say, like, my frustrations with all of this?
Sure.
Actually, since I said it on Twitter, I'll say it here. So, in talking about Puerto Rico and in talking about Roseanne Barr, it's a spectrum of a disease, I would say, that is affecting our society writ large. And the Twitter user Prison Culture, she said something on Twitter that sort of struck me. She said, you know, I don't really care about, you know, individual racism. I'm not trying to be your friend. What I do care about is structural inequality, institutional inequality. I'm sorry if I'm misquoting her. And I responded, it's to look at how sort of preoccupied we are with Roseanne. And don't get me wrong, like, the Roseanne show, it was for the culture, for pop culture. I'm not trying to say, oh, who cares about entertainment? It doesn't matter, because all culture is political and politics stems from culture. It's just, I feel like us as the media, it is so easy to focus on individual racist behavior. We love to focus on when somebody, you know, tweets support for, who knows, KKK. It's so easy because it's easy for
right
us
there.
to point. Yeah, well,
we can embed the tweet.
Well, it's just easy for us to kind of see, like, see, that's what that looks like. We're going to fire them. We're going to get them out of our institution.
Right.
But yet, again, and I'm looking at how we're talking about even this bombshell Puerto Rico news. I mean, 4,600 Americans plus are dead. And it's like, this is what allows us to zero in and focus on Roseanne, yet Media Matters for America is saying there's been 16 times more coverage of Roseanne over the last few days than of Puerto Rico, right? And it's just, it's hard, I get it. It's hard for us to, like, embed structural racism or to get images of what's happening to people.
It's shorthand, and we use it in all things, but
hard.
it particularly happens in this area. Like to your point, we have prominent on the Post website today is this story about welfare and how it is. I may have it slightly wrong, but it's primarily, feelings on that are primarily driven by racial animus. And you know, the extent to which this is pervading everything, I think we see, you know, over and over again these days. And you know, there's the new Ben Rhodes book out, which Peter Baker wrote about yesterday, and you had Obama, this extraordinary anecdote about Obama saying, you know, maybe I came 10 or 20 years too early. I don't know if that's true, but there's clearly the backlash. You know, is something that I did not see something of this magnitude coming. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. issue. It's just, I mean, it's not to say that we should focus on one or the other,
Well,
but it's like when literally lives are at stake,
Yeah.
brown people are dying needlessly.
It's what we were talking about earlier a little bit, is that massing has occurred on Roseanne, but it still hasn't occurred on Puerto Rico.
Like, how many have to die? Like, I'm
Yeah.
at that
Yeah.
point where how many,
Yeah.
what is the number?
Right.
How many lives need to be lost in order for even just a sliver, I guess, of the same kind of breathless coverage that we see?
How many
in
lives
Roseanne?
equal one sitcom?
Yeah.
Well put. This morning, President Trump pardoned political commentator Dinesh D'Souza, who was sentenced to 5 years of probation for campaign finance fraud. So remember, if you're a convicted felon and a prominent conservative pundit and you haven't yet been pardoned by Trump, remember, it's only Thursday.